Welcome to Leadership Explored, the podcast where we dive into what it really means to lead in today's world. I'm Ed Schaefer, joined as always by my co-host Andy Siegmund. We have a massive problem in corporate leadership. We have confused sounding professional with being clear. You see it in the email that uses 5 paragraphs to say no. You see it in the all hands where the CEO talks for 45 minutes about strategic pillars and everyone leaves wondering if they still have a job. We are drowning in words, but we are starving for meaning. True effective communication, real executive presence, isn't about using big words, having the loudest voice in the room, or projecting fake charisma. It's about the ability to transfer an idea from your head to your team's head with as little distortion as possible. It's about high signal and low noise. So today, we're cutting through that noise. We're going to talk about why clarity is the ultimate form of kindness, how to stop spinning the truth, and what the best leaders actually do to make sure they are heard. So Andy, when you compare the best leaders you've worked with against the worst, how much of that difference do you think comes down to how they communicate? And how does that change your perception of them?
I would argue that the lion's share of it does come down to communication, Ed. And I think that communication fosters a lot of things. The first and foremost is trust, right? So it's not just communication; it's like the follow through on communication. Um, for me, the folks who are the best are direct and usually don't beat around the bush, right? They don't leave a lot of ambiguity. They say what they mean what they say. And I think when you're leading a team, building a team, working as part of a team, when you know that when Ed says X, he indeed means X. There's no like, oh, let me put that through an Ed translation service to figure out what X actually means. The easier it is to work, the less churn there is, the less work that there is spent figuring out what is it that so and so was doing on this meeting. Why did they say that? Does this mean this? Does this mean this? There's less of that churn, and you can go forward and go and focus on what you're actually out there to do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, the best leaders that I've ever had, the way they communicate, uh, it doesn't make me uncertain, I guess, is what it comes
Mhm.
down to, right? Like, so some of the worst leaders that I've seen, they'll say a lot of words without getting to the point, or they might send a message with an ask, but the ask isn't clear, and you're stressed out, or even just the "Hey, can we chat later?" kind of a message is what I would say is something that comes from bad leaders compared to the "Hey, can we chat later? This thing happened earlier, and I wanted to talk to you about it." So you at least have some context and understanding, and you're not like worried that you're staring down the barrel of a gun before you go into some meeting with them.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Like, there have been a lot of studies on like uncertainty or just unpredictability, and I can't remember the specific one, but there's one where basically they have two swaths of people, right? And one cohort may or may not get an electric shock at, I don't know, call it 3 p.m. And the other cohort will get an electric shock at 3 p.m. And the cohort that has a 50% chance of getting this electric shock is far more anxious and stressed out than the cohort that has a 100% chance of getting the thing. So it's not the bad thing happening that makes your team anxious and stressed out. It's the possibility or the uncertainty about whether or not a bad thing will happen, right? So whether or not I am in the doghouse, or whether or not I'm going to get fired, or there's going to be layoffs, or insert thing that you might be scared or anxious about. It's the uncertainty that's going to drive up the temperature in the room. And as a leader, the more that you can create certainty, the calmer your team is going to be, and the calmer your team is going to be, the better the outcomes they're going to produce.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think a lot of people think that good communication is about how polished you are, how polished you sound, or how prepared you are. And I don't think that that's true at all, because you can be really polished and have a message that doesn't mean anything or doesn't communicate anything. And which is why what we're talking about today is that good communication is really how much signal are you sending? How much of the right things are you communicating? Not necessarily are you communicating it in the cleanest or most prepared or polished way. And I remember hearing a while back, I couldn't remember who or where I heard this originally, but it's this idea that communication is about what the listener does. And sometimes when people hear that, they think it means, oh, well, if I'm communicating to you, you need to listen better. But really, what it means, it should still be about yourself because I can't control anybody else. So if I'm the listener, I need to listen better. I need to pay attention and make sure I'm hearing what I'm hearing and ask questions to make sure I understand what's being communicated to me. And if you're the listener, then I need to communicate better because I can't affect
Mhm.
how well you listen. We might be able to do some coaching or things like that in the bigger picture, but in the smaller picture, it is, your ability to listen. I can only control how I'm communicating to you. And so the better that I can communicate, the better you can understand, right? Because effective communication isn't about sending the message, it's about it being received. And as a leader, it's our responsibility to tune that frequency so the listener can actually hear it. And if they didn't understand it, sure, we could point fingers and say they weren't listening or whatever. But really, the only thing we can take ownership of is saying that I didn't communicate it the best way or the best way for them or in a clear way for them. So, what does that resonate with you? This idea of communications, what the listener does.
Yeah, I think it does. And one of the things, kind of getting back to like the polish aspect too, right? Like there's and it's what misattributed to Mark Twain, right? I think it's Blaise Pascal, right? I would have written a shorter letter if I had more time. I think one of the key things too is like what makes you polished is your preparation and your understanding of things, right? It's not politician speak, it's not dancing around, right? It's being able to get things as simple as you can so that there's as little room as possible for misinterpretation. And I think one of the mistakes we often make, especially early career, especially, folks who've been like in school longer, if you've got advanced degrees and whatnot, is you feel like you need to sound smart. And the reality is that your best bet is to write and to speak like you're talking to a grade schooler. And that's not to like say that your audience isn't able to understand. It's that you want to lower that cognitive load, and it's kind of two things, right? One, the simpler that you can make something, the more simple and the more direct, usually the more thoroughly you know what the heck it is that you're talking about. There are all these like really fantastic videos out there where like they'll take somebody who's like elite at a thing, right? Say Neil deGrasse Tyson, and have him explain physics to like a toddler, a middle schooler, a college student, and a PhD, right? And you can only really do that if you have that depth of knowledge there. And I think it's know your audience. Don't like focus on presenting in a way that they understand, not in a way that you think makes you look like the smartest person in the room. And I think that's a rabbit hole that we fall into pretty frequently.
Yeah, well, and to the point of the long-winded communication, which I'm sure that we're both guilty of sometimes and
This
many
is a
times.
podcast after all.
But I do think brevity does kind of indicate some level of confidence. I think that the people who babble on the most are probably more often than not more insecure. And I think that the underlying piece there is that if you're trying to manage someone else's reaction, a common way that people do that is over explaining or re-explaining or backtracking or explaining it in another different way that hopefully lands a little bit better. But confident leaders, to your point, they get to the point because they trust that you can handle it and they don't feel like they need to manage your reaction because they know they've communicated the thing in the right way. And I think this kind of connects in some ways um, to like the spin trap, where I think that a problem that a lot of leaders face with communication is that we may often try to soften bad news or hype up boring news, but what the underlying problem with that is it impacts trust, right? When you spin, then people aren't going to listen to the words and they start trying to decode what's happening behind it. And so by not communicating clearly, you wind up having people not listening to the actual words that you're saying and instead trying to figure out what's the message behind it. Um, and I think that's something that we need to avoid. I can think of examples of people have probably seen these emails, or hopefully you haven't seen one recently, where you get this email from the company that says, "Oh, we're embarking on an exciting new chapter of efficiency, blah blah blah," and it's like 2 or 3 paragraphs long, and then at the end it says, "which involves a 10% reduction in force." And you just read this whole long email just to find out the whole point was that they're announcing layoffs and they're just trying to spin it. And when they do that, it feels like a betrayal. And it would almost be better for them to just say it up front. Hey, we're needing to make a reduction or making a change to our staffing or whatever. And I think that a lot of leaders fall into this trap of trying to spin it. And then when they're trying to spin it to manage reactions, they wind up with this long-winded explanation that doesn't do anybody any good. So I'm curious what you think, Andy. When leaders send out heavily massaged, spun up corporate emails, what do you think they're actually trying to achieve? And why do you think that often backfires?
Yeah, I mean, I think often they're trying to soften the blow, and it usually makes things worse. Yeah, I'm always amused. There's all these videos of like translating from corporate to normal or like normal to corporate. Kind of reminds me of the Key and Peele skit with the Obama anger translator, right? Because it's like it's basically that thing, right? But for LinkedIn. Um, a- and I think when we send out these over massaged pieces, you lose credibility and you lose empathy. Like in these layoffs, like we've seen some okay ones lately where they just come out and say like, hey, we're doing this, this is why we're doing this. I think that's how you gain credibility and maintain it. I think when you phrase it as like, oh, it's an exciting new director, like once you get to the chase, like you're just gonna let everyone down. So like just get it out of the way. Like rip the band-aid off, tell everyone what's going on. Like everyone's gonna figure it out. So like you can either be direct and avoid some of the noise, or you can try to obfuscate or beat around the bush or like frame something in a way that's like clearly disingenuous. And all you're gonna do is just like dial up the water cooler taco meter by 1,000%.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes me wonder why clarity is so hard to achieve. I think a lot of people hear executive presence and they picture extroversion and talking loud and dominating the room and projecting fake charisma. But I don't know if for me, I don't know if that's really what I think of as executive, like true executive presence. So I'm curious, what do you think actual effective executive presence looks like?
I think it's command of the subject matter, and confidence, and like confidence is earned, right? So confidence is usually based on results. It's based on knowing that you know the thing. Yeah, and I think that there's a reason that the VP or the C-suite person like responds to your 3 paragraph email with a single sentence or less, right? Like they're just saying exactly what it is that they need to say. There's no wasted breath, there's no wasted movement, there's no like wasted nicety. Like they're going to ask for the thing that they want exactly how they want it. And I think that presence in a room or in a meeting comes with the same thing, right? It's direct, it's straightforward. Um, it's not high charisma, it's not like high volume, you know, and in high entertainment. It's just like it is exactly what it is.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of it is what we talked about in our last episode too, where it's the um, being confident in what you do know, and then also being confident in what you don't know, and knowing who the person is who has those answers or can provide that information, and being comfortable with saying, I don't know, or I'm not as familiar with this, but here's the expert who I trust, who gives me the information to make the right decisions, and they can explain this thing. I think in large part accepting where your strengths are and then where your limitations are, and then projecting that in a way that your people recognize that you aren't bloviating or trying to cover up a lack of knowledge and things like that. I think that helps in a lot of ways for that executive presence. I was trying to think about why, like, what are some of the things behind this that cause this with these different leaders? And the first one that came to mind for me was there's almost a curse of knowledge for these leaders. And when you think about it, leaders have all of the context, right? They know the budget, they know the timeline, they know what kind of board pressure there is, they know a client's reaction or past experience or things like that. And I think a lot of leaders forget that the team doesn't have any of that context and information, or maybe a very small amount. And I think that leads to a lot of leaders communicating the what, like what they need or what needs to happen, but forgetting to communicate the why, or the reasons behind it. Which, as with both of us with agile backgrounds, the why is often more important than the what, because the what's not always going to be the right choice. If the team knows what the why is, what the reason is behind something, they might be able to come up with better solutions or better approaches than the people who had less direct interaction with the solution would have. But because only the what gets communicated, a lot of times we fall into that trap of just having people deliver, as opposed to communicating in a way that they can communicate back, and we can get to those better solutions. Um,
Yeah, and working from that like desired outcome and the reason for that desired outcome is like it's really the only way to decentralize decision making, right? If you want to cascade things down, if you want to give people agency and an opportunity to think for themselves, at least within like the context of their domain, it's really critical that we articulate not just what we are trying to do, but like what doing it looks like and why we are doing it, right? Yeah, I think we can often get held up in our own institutional knowledge too. Like one of the gut checks that I like to do for a lot of communication, like one of the things I do pretty frequently is I'll like compile managing upwards, like executive documents. And I I don't want to have to explain everything that's going on. Like the purpose of a doc is not to have a talk track. It should be self-sustaining. And like to me, the key there is you have to build this so that somebody who does not know your context can immediately grasp your context and the constraints that you're working under so that they can understand the decision making process or the status and what is good or what is not good within that domain. And if you have to provide everything else, like you should be able to explain it to somebody who doesn't work at your organization in that sense, right? I think we often like just try to shortcut, and when we do that, we create gaps in understanding, we create gaps in communication, and that shortcut ends up being a really roundabout route to where we're going towards.
oh yeah, the number of times I've been pulled into some meeting in some specific domain or context that I didn't have any information about, and I'm sitting in there and they start rattling off, acronyms or just different things that I've never heard of before, and they're using shorthand or, oh, remember this and that, and it's like, no, I don't know any of the context about what you're talking about, and it makes it really difficult to have the conversation. But it's like there's this assumption built in that everybody already has all of the context, and that's one of the things I try to do with a lot of meetings that I have is before the meeting, like at the very beginning of the meeting, I try to establish a baseline of, hey, this here's why we're here today. Here's the context of this meeting. Here's the background of this client or of this situation. Here's what we're trying to accomplish today, just to make sure that everybody is on the same page when we start, and nobody feels like they are sitting back without the right amount of information and just don't know what to do. Um, Something else I was thinking about was, uh, in terms of why the leaders are hiding transparency. I've definitely heard and seen many times where something is hidden, and it's because someone thinks that the team can't handle the truth. And, I know in the context of layoffs, like knowing layoffs are coming, sometimes there's HR or legal considerations that don't always make that something that you can easily share. But I think this idea of we can't tell them or we can't share this information because they might not be able to handle the truth is a really poor perspective, because the reality most of the time is that the team knows something's going on. They know there's been these weird meetings, or these discussions have been ongoing, or they've heard something from somebody second, third hand who heard something else from somebody second or third hand. And so everybody's already making up a version of the truth in their heads. And usually the version they're making up in their heads is worse than the reality of what's going on. And if the leaders would, instead of trying to hide that transparency or think they can't handle it, if they would, if more leaders would bring some of these things to the team earlier, or communicate them in a way, maybe not as directly as like we're going to be doing layoffs pretty soon, but maybe it's like, hey, we're having some issues with, cash flow or whatever, and it may result in some changes to the organization. I think that even though it can make people a little bit anxious, I think it sets people more at ease than just having the super high amount of uncertainty while they can tell something's going on without actually seeing, seeing the truth of what's coming. And then they are expecting the absolute worst. Oh, we're expecting everybody's going to get laid off, or, oh, we're going to get, acquired by somebody, or, something else that's not even true. And now you have people putting all this mental energy and concern into something that is maybe more severe than the actual reality if it had been shared earlier. So I guess, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you feel like your team can't handle the truth, you probably need to get a better team. Broadly speaking, just be super blunt about that. The one thing I want to caution, right? We're using, I think, pretty easy to digest examples, right? Like layoffs and whatnot. Is with things like that, right? It's very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube on those sorts of decisions. Like that's kind of a one-way door decision. So if your stance is so, like, I've worked for a handful of small companies that talk about like the financial position of the company regularly, right? They don't hide it, right? It's like, this is our monthly all hands, and we're going to talk about our revenue numbers, what came in, what our cash flow position is, and whatnot. I think that is a great stance. If it's something you don't talk about frequently, and you're thinking about talking about it because there might be layoffs in the future, that is a one-way door. And make sure that, if you're going to start talking about something that you haven't talked about before, and it's not a good thing, that the outcome of that not good thing is a foregone conclusion. Otherwise you're just cascading stress and anxiety down to your team without any net benefit.
Yeah. Speaking of doors, I this is a great spot for me to bring up something that I kind of hate, uh, which is the open door policy, right? Oh, my door is always open. And it's not that I dislike someone saying that their door is always open, if that's really true, which a lot of times it's not actually true. But I think the open door policy, or saying my door is always open, is lazy communication. A lot of leaders that I see who put that message out there, it's I think it shifts the burden on the team to come get clarity. And most of the time, the leaders I see who talk about that the most, their open door policy, one, they're the least available. Even though their door might be open, they can never, you can never actually go talk to them.
Their calendar is booked for 38 hours a week.
Yeah. And number two, it usually means that they didn't communicate whatever they needed to communicate that well in the first place. It's almost like a shortcut to saying, I'm not going to prepare and I'm not going to communicate clearly to my people. So I'm going to say I have an open door policy, and then, it's like, uh I don't know, it's almost like the idea of going to confession, right? Like, you go sin a whole bunch, but if you go to confession, you get it off your back and you don't have to worry about it anymore. It's like, well, yeah, that's not really true. Just having an open door policy doesn't mean that you are communicating well, or that people are going to come to get the message from you, and extract it from you. And I think that's also asking a lot to, when we talked about the context that the leader has. If I'm the direct and I don't have the context, and I feel and I don't know that you didn't communicate well to me, why am I going to come to your open door policy? I don't, there's not like a reason pulling me that says I should go and ask you and get that clarity. And so I think that is something to watch out for. It's not that having a policy like that is bad inherently if it really is true and it's because you want people to come and ask questions. But if the reason that you're doing it is just so you can communicate less or less well or be less prepared when you communicate, I think that's a real problem. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, and I think the open door policy can kind of be a cop out. It's like it can be one of those things that it's like it's easy to say, but like there's very little execution or follow through on it, right? Yeah, and I think that the idea of not subjecting your listener, your audience, your team to needing to come to you to get clarity, provide them with clarity, right? The onus is on you to be clear. The onus should not be on them to force you to be clear. Yeah, I think that's a really good call out.
Yeah. And I mean, I think too, as you were uh, responding there, it made me think how many times I've seen someone say they have an open door policy, but then they don't have regular team meetings or regular leadership readouts or all hands or something like that. So they not only are they shortcutting their communication in general, but I think a lot of times it becomes an excuse to get rid of other communication like platforms that ultimately cause problems and I think lead to people being confused or working on the wrong things or not understanding why something is
Mm,
important.
yeah, it's a really excellent call out.
So let's talk about good communication, and I think we've kind of already hinted at this quite a lot. But ambiguity breeds anxiety. So in the absence of clear communication, people will fill the gaps, and they're probably going to fill it with fear. And research does consistently show that high trust organizations index highest on predictable, context rich communication. So I was trying to think of what are some of the things that I've learned or used or I've seen other leaders use that I really liked that I think lead to successful communication and good communication. The first one for me, well, I guess broadly, I would call it radical clarity. I don't know if everything needs to be radical leadership and radical transparency and all of that stuff, but I think
I don't know. Every time I hear radical, I just think of like something very 1990s, Full House, like that kind
oh yeah, I'm
of
thinking
radical
Ninja
dude. Like,
Turtles maybe, yeah.
yeah, exactly, exactly.
But I do think just focusing on like how can I be clearer? How can I make my message clearer? So one of my favorite tools is the bluff, bottom line up front. Don't bury the lead. Just start with the ask or the news. I think sometimes in an email you might label this as an executive summary or something like that. Personally, I've a bunch of times I've actually just started an email with bold BLUF colon and then just like one or two sentences that just hey, we're over budget and the project's behind schedule and we need some decisions made immediately to for next steps. And that might just be a couple sentences and then you actually go into the details of, oh, this is the timing of what happened and these are the specific decisions that need to be made. But having the like just the bottom line of what it is that you're asking up front, it's almost like a too long didn't read on a Reddit thread or something.
Mhm.
And especially when if you're communicating uh, to other leaders, or especially if you're communicating up, having something like this can really improve what kind of responses you get, how fast of a response you get. If I just say up front, like, this is the answer, I need an answer to this question, and then here's the rest of the context and the details so that you can figure it out. I find that helps a lot. So just starting with the ask or the news and then playing it out and getting into more details. Is that something you've ever used or found success with?
Yeah, I haven't framed it that way. So I haven't done the like bold bluff colon 2 line piece, but my typical format, especially for requests and whatnot, is like high level summary, requests, supporting information, right? And part of that's for clarity. Part of that is especially managing upwards or working with clients. It's a it's a respect the effort and respect people's time thing, right? So I want, if you're not the right person for this, I want you to know that and to tell me with 30 seconds of your investment in time. I don't want you to invest 5 or 10 minutes, right? So that's a big piece of it too, is respect people's effort, respect people's time. Um, and I also think it earns a lot of trust to do that with the supporting data, right? Because that comes to kind of what we were talking about a little bit before, right? Concision is a skill set. It's something that's learned. It's one of the things that requires a lot of mental horsepower. Um, you can have AI help you with it these days, but oftentimes you don't get the outcome you're really looking for when you do that. And I think that, like, when you do with something like a bottom line up front of like, I need an answer to this question, or we're over budget, we're over timeline, the client is unhappy, help. And then the narrative details of what's going on, you get attention. You also, like, if you could synthesize all of that, the details you have below are usually going to be better, and they're going to be more clear because you know what it is that you're trying to do. So basically, like, you can write a narrative, you can create your bottom line up front, and then from the narrative, and then you refine your narrative to support your bottom line up front and trim the fat off of it, right? And I think all of these are really good exercises for just dialing in your communication overall and making sure that you're respecting people's time and that you're super well prepared. And especially in written communication, I think that this is the best way to avoid meetings that could have been an email. Just write better darn emails.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I mean, with when you're writing, if you write this long email without a bluff or an executive summary or something at the beginning, what can sometimes happen is, people are reading through and they're reading through some details, and account manager so and so, they read through and they see a particular detail about some dollar amount or some request from the client, and that's what they zero in on and focus on, even if that wasn't what you were trying to communicate or what you were deeming as the important part of the message that you were sharing. And I've definitely had that
Mhm.
happen before, where somebody's asking me questions about one small piece of a problem, and that's not really the piece that we need to focus on or needs to be addressed, but that's what they're focused on, or that's what their specialty is, or what their job is to focus on that. So they zero in on that, but they kind of, it's almost missing the forest for the tree,
Mhm.
kind of a situation.
Yeah, or it can be one of those, like, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. But you can also use some of that to your advantage too when you're working with your various teams. So, like, for example, in my current organization, for all of our top 10 accounts, we do periodic leadership team reviews. And I can tell you what types of questions the CEO and the CRO and the CFO are going to ask, which is great for your preparation.
Yeah, that's a great point. Next up, another solution I was thinking of, and I'll admit I'm kind of guilty of this one. This is something I'm working on myself, but I'm calling it the playback loop. So I think a lot of times what happens is we'll explain something and we ask, "Does that make sense?" And I don't know if "does that make sense" is inherently a bad question, but the problem with it is when you say "does that make sense," a lot of times people are just gonna nod or say yes, sure, that makes sense. And there's no way to know for sure if it made sense to them, or if they actually heard what you were, if they downloaded what you were uploading, or if there was some static or some data loss or miscommunication with that information that you were trying to share. So a different approach, if you're one who says, "Does that make sense?" a lot, which I have been guilty of, maybe
Mhm.
ask, "What's your takeaway from this?" Or "How are you interpreting this?" Or even, "What do you see as the biggest risk?" Because any of those types of questions, instead of just asking for a confirmation, you're actually asking them to synthesize and process and then respond back. And so it's almost like getting that little mini read back of, "What did I just say to you? tell it back to me to make sure that there is no miscommunication, right? And when they do that, if you said, uh, hey, we need to order, whatever lemon colored napkins for this event because that's the color of the theme, and they come back and they say we need to order yellow napkins, like you're pretty close, but actually it needs to be lemon, right? So sometimes even that small amount of nuance can make the difference, and just hearing it back and having that opportunity to see what they got from what you said and then how they processed it not only helps make sure that what you're trying to communicate gets communicated clearly, but it can also give you extra tools to communicate better with that person in the future now that you have a sense of how their brain hears and interprets what you say and how they process it when they read it back to you. So what do you think
Yeah.
about that? Is that something that you do, or are you guilty of the does that make sense?
I'm guilty of the does that make sense or did I make sense? I love this. I'm going to try this probably next week. Realistically, for context, we're talking at the end of the day on a Friday, everyone. So I'm not being super lazy about this. Um, but no, I think that this is really good, right? Because you're basically asking for a read back of that, and this is also as a listener or as like on a receiving end, this is also a good way to confirm that you have heard what the other person was trying to tell you. So this is something I do practice a lot is okay, I heard this,
Hmm.
yada, 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 yada. Did I get that right? So that one does go both ways. I had not thought about asking people to, what did you hear? So I'm going to try that.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm definitely I and maybe it's imposter syndrome or whatever else, but I'm definitely on the same page with you. I always do that back. Like what I think I heard you say is this, or if I'm okay, did I understand this correctly? Blah 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 blah, and I repeat it back to him because I want to know if I understood right. Because
Right.
sometimes I don't, or sometimes I've heard something completely different than what was communicated to me, and I really want to make sure I understand.
Yeah. Whereas it feels like kind of a power move to flip it the other way. And as I'm thinking about this, I have definitely asked my children to repeat back what I said to them to confirm that they were in fact, but that's usually because I didn't think that they were listening.
Yeah, and I guess that is a maybe a caution for folks, especially if you have kids. You may need to just watch your tone or how you ask that question because you certainly don't want to come off as condescending or like you're the adult and they're the child or anything like that. So
Yeah.
something to be mindful of, probably being like, I don't know if you heard what I said. I want you to say it back to me. That might not be the best approach to
Yeah.
um,
Proceed with caution.
yeah, but maybe saying like, "I wanna make sure that I'm communicating in a clear way to you. Can you just read back like, tell me back what you think that I just said to you to make sure that we're on the same page?" That's probably a pretty safe way to approach it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah. And that's also like that comes down to what you say and what people hear is not always the same thing. And I don't mean like the literal words that are coming out of my mouth. I mean like what you might have read between the lines, or thought about this, right? And this is something that can be really useful, not just in the workplace, but sometimes in your relationships as well, right? Like saying, like, so Ed, what I heard was this, right? Can be really, really, really helpful because then what you can do is you're talking to the way that it was received, which is also like it's interpreting tone and timing and all of these other things that are beyond the literal words that are coming out of your mouth. So I think that that's just like a good call out overall.
yeah. And then the other thing or one other thing I was thinking about was this kind of balance between transparency versus oversharing. Right. I think sometimes when we talk about this idea of communicating better, or when we say you should be transparent communication and communicate as much as you can, people will tend to, not always, but sometimes they'll tend to interpret it as being like, oh, well, now you're telling me I need to share everybody's salary, or well, I can't share board secrets. That was in a private board meeting. So until it's public, we can't share anything. And that's not what we're saying at all. Obviously, there are certain things that are not able to be shared. And if you were to share them, it would be oversharing or potentially risky or have a problem for the organization. But I think finding that right balance between transparency and where what you can share and where you can share it versus what you can't and why not, um, is just something to be balanced about. And sometimes it's okay to say, I can't really tell you about these decisions yet, but we'll have more news soon. That can be, even that is a kind way of communicating something. But I think behind all of this would be, when decisions get made and people know about them, you need to share the logic behind the decisions. Like, what was the decision making process? How did we come to this conclusion? And going back to the layoffs example, there's, I've seen the back end of some layoffs where the people who got laid off, everybody's confused and they don't understand why. And from like a software engineering perspective, I've seen the result of a layoff where somebody who was the top engineer on the team, who knew the most and was the smartest, who was like the mentor for the other people on the team, they got laid off. And the team is sitting there. I mean, I've literally heard this phrase before, which is, if that person got fired, I don't know what I'm even doing here because I am way less skilled or less senior or whatever than they were. And um just not understanding why decisions were made can sometimes lead to bigger impacts. And that's not to say you have to be communicating and say like, well, this is the reason why Andy specifically got laid off. But if you can communicate to some extent, like, hey, part of the reason we made these decisions was based on whatever salary ranges or who had been contributing the most, or just something, so that it doesn't feel, and maybe in some cases it is arbitrary, like we just had to cut off the bottom 10% or something like that. But if you can find a way to communicate as transparently as you can without oversharing, especially when we talk about the logic behind decisions, I think that helps people a lot, and it builds more trust, even if you can't share all the details behind it. Does that resonate with you at all?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think like the more impactful the thing is that you're communicating about, right? So you're talking about layoffs, for example, the more delicate and thoughtful you have to be with your communication overall, right? And one of the other things I think, I'm sure you've found this throughout your career, is like as you take on larger roles where you have a larger impact on the company, you also end up with considerably more inside information as far as what's going on, which means that you have to behave with increasingly more discretion, right? And that's like part of the reason that you have that role, is because of your ability to have discretion and to think about that. So like I went through a round of layoffs not too long ago, where I was part of the leadership team that was in the room making the decision, and the lead time from the decision to like the day of impact was considerable, right? So we had to hang on to that for quite a long, because there is no upside in communicating that until you're there, right? Because there's various constraints that you've got to work with. And unfortunately, like if you are a leader, or you are aspiring to a leader, part of your job is to carry that weight. And if you're not comfortable with doing that, if you don't want to do that, um, you know, be aware that like that comes with the job description.
Yeah. It's funny. I know we keep using layoffs as the example, and I think I mean, it's an easy example, certainly, and it's an impactful example that a lot of people think about. But I know it's also a topic that we have coming up probably in a few episodes that we've been sitting on for a little while. So I know it's top of mind for me as well, getting ready for some of those future episodes. But so
Yeah.
I'm curious, Andy, before we kind of move towards getting ready to close out today, is there any other approaches or frameworks that you've seen work really well that would help a leader move from just broadcasting information to actually creating alignment?
I mean, I think we've hit on all of the basic ways to go about it, Ed. I think there's like a few things that we should remember as leaders when you're creating alignment, when you're working with a team. And that's that, like, there's a difference between being nice and being kind, right? Being kind is telling you that you have a mustard stain on your shirt. Being nice is saying, you look great, nice outfit, right? People don't want to hear about the mustard stain because it's embarrassing at the moment, but it helps them be better. It helps them be aware of an issue that's going on. And when you're communicating, right, the best way to be kind is to be direct and to be actionable, right? If you're in a coaching call, if you're in a one-on-one, right, you can use like the SBI format, right? Situation, behavior, impact, to frame what goes on. But being nice to the people who you work with is not the same as being kind with them. The other thing I want to also kind of harp on is that one of the key tenets I think we should have when we're communicating with our teams, when we're asking our teams for things, is respect the effort that goes into stuff, right? So if you are sending an email out to your team, respect the effort that it takes to actually read the thing, right? So use something like that big idea up front, or bottom line up front, right? Edit, be concise, right? Respect that. And if you're going to ask your team to do something, also understand that like you are asking for labor in whatever way, shape, or form that labor happens, right? If that's hands on keyboard, if that's attention, if that's to travel across the country to go see a client, whatever it is, like understand what you are asking for, and try to move forward with like that baseline empathy and understanding. And I think that'll help frame your communication in a way that's more receptive to your audience.
Yeah. So I have three things I wanted to share with our audience as application that you could take away and use tomorrow or Monday morning if it's a Friday for you when you're listening. First one would be the bluff challenge. So for every email you write this week, put the ask or the decision or the bottom line up front in the very first sentence. Maybe bold it and then provide all the details below. See if that changes things or how that affects your communication. The second thing is frame the unknowns. Stop trying to sound perfectly certain on everything. When discussing a complex project, explicitly separate what you know from what you don't. Say, here is what we know, here is what we're guessing, and here is when we'll have more information. Clarity about uncertainty is still clarity. I think a lot of times we fall into this trap of not having answers or not knowing, and instead of just saying we don't know and this is what we need to get to uncover it, we pretend like we know, or we just move past it without digging in. And then the third thing that came to mind for me is the why context. So whenever you're assigning a task or announcing a change of any kind, force yourself to add one extra sentence. The context for this is, or the background for this is, and just do everything you can to connect the dots between the ask or the change and the broader strategy. And that helps people understand how we got there and where it came from. And it feels less like a black box and more like something that they can understand. Anything you'd want to add to that, or any last thoughts for our listeners this week?
I think that's really covered it. Yeah, I think this is an important conversation to have. So glad we got to do it.
Great. Well, let's wrap up for today. Communication is the nervous system of leadership. If the signal is weak, the body can't move. Being nice or polished doesn't matter if your team is constantly confused. Real leadership is having the courage to be simple, direct, and clear, even when the news is hard. So here's your challenge this week. Pick one email or meeting where you would normally try to soften the message or dance around the point. Don't. Be kind, but be direct. Put the bottom line up front. See if your team responds with panic or with relief. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's episode. Think about the best communicator you've ever worked for. What specifically did they do differently? Have you ever received an email that caused panic just because it was too vague? You can email us at leadershipexplored@gmail.com or connect with us on LinkedIn. We'd love to hear your stories or ideas for topics you'd like us to explore in the future. If you found this conversation helpful, please make sure to follow the show, leave a review, or share it with a colleague who cares about growing great teams. We release new episodes every other Tuesday. Until next time, keep leading with purpose.